From UFOs to psychic powers and government conspiracies, history is riddled with unexplained events. You can turn back now, or learn the stuff they don't want you to know.
And we're back with our final listener mail segment of today's episode. This one comes from Amy, and I think the subject line says it all. Alt-right pipeline, gaming, YouTube, TikTok. Hi, gang. Love the show. Thank you for all of your hard work and research. I was chatting with my college-aged 19-year-old daughter the other night. With all the news about the Capitol riot, we were discussing alt-right and where the heck they came from. She mentioned something that is apparently very well known in her age group about the alt-right pipeline from gaming to YouTube to TikTok and the algorithm that connects or channels typically white young men to these groups. Have you looked into this, or do you plan to? I think the short answer is this absolutely deserves, we've talked about the YouTube algorithm and the way that can be it can create some very interesting results because, like you said, Ben, either on this episode or on the last one we recorded today, it is the job of sites like Twitter, like Reddit, like Facebook to keep people tangled in their ecosystem for as long as possible. So it behooves them to give people recommendations that are engaging, and oftentimes divisive content is engaging, whether you're just looking at it from kind of like a rubbernecky kind of, just absolutely curiosity kind of perspective, or which is how a lot of this starts, let's not forget. But then you go down the rabbit hole after rabbit hole after rabbit hole, and before you know it, you could be indoctrinated. And it turns out this is absolutely true, that alt-right presences, we know for a fact they've used the internet with great success for radicalizing people and gathering followers and message boards and things like Stormfront websites, to various listservs and message boards and things on 4chan and 8chan that kind of get pushed off of more traditional platforms like Facebook. But we also know that Facebook has copped to having not enough oversight over these kinds of groups coming up. And now we're seeing the tide really turn on that with what's happened in Washington at the Capitol, and now all of these kind of hate groups being deplatformed with things like we talked about on the last episode, like Parler. It begs the question kind of like, well, where are they going now? What's the next step? How do they kind of infiltrate these other things without being so overt about it? And the answer is exactly what Amy was talking about. They are trying to be a little more sneaky about it, and they're going on places like TikTok. TikTok, you may say? I thought that was for like lip syncs and funny dance videos. And yeah, of course, that's absolutely the bread and butter of it. But the thing about TikTok that's interesting is you can have a relatively small following. Like my daughter, for example, loves TikTok, and she has maybe like 1,000 followers, which is a lot. I mean, like she's 12 years old. I think that's pretty cool. And she is very into it, and it's a community, and she's like met a lot of interesting people her age that are into cosplay and stuff like she is. But even if you only have 1,000 followers, you can have a video that gets circulated to like-minded people through this algorithm, and they can be viewed hundreds of thousands of times. Typically, you think of views being associated directly with like how many followers do you have. On TikTok, it doesn't quite work like that. So there's a really great article on the Statesman, the New Statesman rather, called "How the Alt-Right is Pivoting to TikTok." And the way they're doing it is by putting up memes and little scenes that masquerade as this, kind of more traditional TikTok content, usually comedy or little skits, and having it use veiled language that promotes racist, xenophobic, or homophobic content. And it's harder for the mods to grab. And I think it's fascinating. And also places like Instagram, where a lot of kind of alt-right memes are shared, things like with Pepe the Frog, that are like a little harder to scrub for. They're a little harder to detect because it's not overtly hate speech, but it is painting a picture of like a mindset. Another article I read on Vice called "How Alt-Right Memes Are Indoctrinating Generation Z" It's because it creates this thing, this system, this cycle, where if like a kid sees a meme that's in this style with the Pepe the Frog, maybe they share it, but then maybe they get called out for it. And what does that lead to? That leads to shame. That leads to, and what does shame lead to often? Anger, resentment of being told what to think, being told, what to share. And so that cycle then can bring these Gen Z kids deeper into the cycle of indoctrination because they've been called out and they feel threatened, and it just makes them double down. So it's really interesting. I actually was texting my daughter, have you seen racist content on TikTok? And she said mainly in response to other people's content, which would be like people of color, cosplayers of color. That's her thing. She's all about this cosplay anime stuff. So she says occasionally she'll see response videos that people will do that are like making fun of or demeaning or trying to humiliate cosplayers of color or non-binary or what have you. And because it's such a tight-knit community, they come to each other's aid, they back each other up, they get those people kicked. But she does see it. And I don't know, it's scary because the internet is so powerful. Information is so powerful. And it's such a tender age for a lot of these kids, especially if they're in bad home situations. And this is like, giving them some kind of solace or some kind of sense of community. It's scary. And it's the whole deplatforming conversation. It does seem that works. It seems like when these groups, like Stormfront, for example, was deplatformed, and that GoDaddy, the popular web serving provider, took away their account, and they got less of a reach as a result. So deplatforming does work, even if it's a temporary ban. It means people will think twice before sharing stuff like that got them banned, because people use social media for all kinds of stuff. I mean, it's such a huge part of people's day-to-day lives that nobody wants to lose that privilege. So it does work, and I'm all for it. I don't know. What do you guys think?
There's some really interesting stuff coming out of Pew Research and a couple other places that are really looking at millennials and Gen Z and comparing the two and just kind of their general temperament about a lot of things. And one commonality that appears to be increasing is questioning the regularly fed narrative in anything. So what is the official story? Well, I, as an individual, would choose to look for an alternative to that official story. I don't know. I'm kind of proud of that. Maybe we had a small hand in that. I don't know. But that feels like a good move, right? To be able to think critically about anything, even if it's the official story that's being told to you. The problem is that it makes each individual a little more susceptible to something that is alternative, right? Like vastly alternative, perhaps maybe a little on the edge or on the fringe. So it does seem like the younger people who are using newer, applications, newer platforms may be looking for a different kind of story and way more interested in that than anything that you'd see just on the news.
Yeah, because people want to, I think that's well said, Matt. One thing you might notice, this happens in friend groups a lot too, is that people like to be Promethean. We want to be the person who figures the truth out. We want to be the person who brings the light. You've probably had those conversations where, people are in a contest to be the person who knows the thing. That's another iteration of this. I've been doing some digging into this, and Amy, I really appreciate your letter here, because this is something that warrants an episode. There's some really interesting research coming out of the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology. They started by breadcrumbing comments on what they called alt-light videos, which could be gaming sources. Like, let's say, for instance, and this is not a real example. Let's say there's a Magic the Gathering channel, and the person or the personalities hosting that are also sort of sliding in some alt-light stuff, right? That's just a general term for something that might be alternative to the official narrative people hear. Well, what this research found after analyzing 3,300,000 videos on 350 different YouTube channels, this was a system designed by the Anti-Defamation League. What they found is that they could trace the authors of 72 million comments on about 2 million videos between May and July of a single year. You can read about this in MIT Technology Review, and they found that more than 26% of people who commented on stuff that was like a little bit off kilter tended to drift over to further extremes in other videos. And the algorithm of YouTube specifically would start to tilt the scales as people searched for specific keywords. This work was presented at the 2020 Conference on Fairness, Accountability, and Transparency in Barcelona. But the problem is, with the research these folks found, is they're not sure exactly how this process, this pipeline works, at least the YouTube piece of it, because YouTube restricts access to recommendation data. It's their secret sauce. And if you have experience on the creator side of YouTube, like Matt and I have done a lot with this, you're well aware of how ardently YouTube protects that information, because they don't want people to be able to radically game and break the system. But the bill's coming due. That pipeline thing is real. Amy, it's not just something that your daughter made up. It is very much a real thing. There's quantitative data behind it, and it bears further investigation. I would love to make this an episode. Thank you so much for writing to us.